I'm with Patrick Palmer from Adobe, and Adobe's done very well this year. I feel they've actually improved their product range by giving a lot of things that everyone has asked for. Basically, listening to the users and producing some amazing new feature sets for the new product range or the addition to CC. But today we're going to talk about some things I hope Patrick can answer the questions for, because we're looking into the future and there's usually, there's only so much you can talk about. But one of the things, as you know, I'm looking at the standards, emerging standards, and it's the industry's been working on a lot of technologies over the last year. Simply has been looking back and trying to come up with standardising a lot of those technologies to help reduce like snowflake workflows and other bits and pieces, so we can all start producing on the same page. Now, some of those things I'm going to mention to Patrick is something, for example, VC5, which Adobe and Lars Borg has been greatly involved with. Can you tell me how is that going to materialise in the Adobe CC product range? Can you talk to me about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for the nice introduction. Indeed, it's great to be here at NAB showing off all the new cool things, but we're going to talk about that later, I guess. So VC5, generally speaking, I think you've seen us looking at everything going in, going out the same way in the last couple of years, right? If there's something emergent and it becomes something the industry is going towards, we're getting engaged early on. So we want to know what the standard bodies are talking about. We get involved. You already mentioned Lars Borg. For those who don't know, that's one of our principal color scientists attending some of those bodies, actually most of them, thinking about it. So he's very active there. We're also trying to make a contribution, not just going there, seeing what's the trend, trying to help actually come together and come to a formula that everyone can agree to, so we can eventually, as the industry, move forward and adopt new technologies in a meaningful way and in a meaningful time frame. So as you said, the glass bowl problem, I can't necessarily tell you when and what, but safe to say we're engaged for a reason.
Yeah, that's right. I absolutely agree with that, and I've been involved in some of those meetings, and there's a lot of features of VC5 which are quite exceptional in terms of taking the best of what we've learned from ProRes and DNX HD, and also raw workflows, because unlike ProRes and DNX HD, VC5 is also applicable to raw workflows, and that's important because the way it's implemented is in a lightweight way, in that, unlike Red Raw, for example, you need a Red Rocket to actually use Red Raw, pretty much.
I would say by now you're pretty much okay using Premiere with a good GPU in the machine. So there are various ways of
but on a laptop you can't really get there. But VC5 can actually compress raw bit streams as well. It has a roughly 10% hit in file size, but it's 10 times more efficient. So for example, it's reasonable if a camera exported to a VC5 to a raw VC5 compressed bit stream to edit it on a laptop. So this is why I think Adobe is interested in it, and it's I just want to put it out there that this is there's some interesting things coming down the pipe. So let's talk about a few other ones. It's a bit early, but we'll mention IMF. Mm-hmm. Can you say anything about IMF yet?
Well, if you look at IMF and what it's about, it's basically getting the plethora of outputs addressed by having something that is more ubiquitous, more applicable to various outputs at once. So a colleague of yours just mentioned a couple of minutes before the interview that sometimes you see 200 outputs generated just, for the first week of something hitting the market. If you would explain that to someone in the print industry, they would probably think that's somehow insane, right?
Insane. I call it madness. This is madness.
Right. So we certainly can manage that today, but I think it's quite interesting to look at IMF, or generally speaking, any kind of standardization that area, to just basically streamline and make sure that it's easier to produce output, and arguably for us, looking at Premiere becoming the hub of so many more workflows, we've got to be involved in looking at how people can actually produce output that's not only meaningful and true to the creative vision, but at the same time, they're not taking additional load and producing so many things that honestly sometimes they might not really understand fully, because there are so many details in every output that you might need to attend to. It's a very special job.
Yes, and especially before we started the video, we had a quick conversation on. So I think the important issue here, especially for Adobe, is that you may have the IMF file format, but how you approach it to the end user is something that still has to evolve. So IMF is getting reasonably mature now, but what is not mature is how it actually materializes to the editor who's pushing all the buttons and how he can understand it, because it's quite a complex file format. It can do a lot, and that's because I couldn't explain it. It'd take me 15 minutes to explain it at bare minimum, but that's the power of it. It's like the space shuttle has a lot of buttons on it because it can go to the moon, and IMF is sort of a little bit like that. But let's move on.
There's actually something worth mentioning in terms of how we tend to look at these things at Adobe. So last year, for example, the DPP in the UK has announced their DPP AS11 standard.
Yes.
And so we've been involved with them as well. We're working with them, basically many other manufacturers at the same time. That's the point about it. So the entire industry indeed keeps moving. But that was an interesting experience because finally it's actually also very complex what you package there. So the idea in their case was, I guess, pretty much forget about that tape ever existed, deliver everything digitally, but do so in a fashion that everyone can agree to, and it can be done both on time and budget.
That's right.
And eventually also keeping something, that's ubiquitous enough. I'm again thinking about archiving as well.
Yes.
I think we have to be very, very much aware that with so many deliverables, what's eventually going to be in the archive and how we're going to look back at those things in a couple of years from now, I think it's an important issue.
Yes, I completely agree with you, and that's why you should be interested in it, guys, because it's going to change the way you do stuff in a year to 2 years' time. And what was the last thing? We also wanted to quickly talk about another emerging standard, is immersive audio. Very early again. I don't even think you guys would ever be bothered looking into it yet. Maybe have your eyes on it, but it's a very interesting evolution of cinema and production. I expect. Have you got any comments on it at all at this stage?
Well, I'm certainly not the audio expert in the group, so you're kind of talking to the wrong guy. However, being an audio nerd,
yes,
I can tell you this, I was blown away with some of the presentations already last year when it was kind of some of it behind closed doors. Now you can actually see it more publicly facing because it's been evolved and now people are trying to push forward. I think all of it is very interesting, what you can do now, both making it more interactive. I think that's quite a fascinating thing for live sports events in particular, as well as for cinematic experiences where you just basically make the audience forget that there is a source of the audio. There's no speakers anymore. If you're in Adobe Atmos presentation, I think you will find it very hard to identify that it's coming from either particular source. The sound is there. You're embedded in the experience. So I think rightfully so, they're calling it immersive. What we're going to do about it, I can tell you that we're going to look at it as we always do. If there's something emerging quickly and the customers have a need for us to adapt it and bring it to the product, we'll do what we always do. We'll look at the options. Maybe we'll partner with someone. Maybe if it's very big and the general movement of the industry, we'll bring it to the product. We'll talk to our customers, evaluate the options, and get the technology in as it's required, and keep you updated every year as we do at NAB.
Yes. It's always an interesting time at NAB.
Yeah.
And there's the last thing I want to talk about, and it's the topic of the show. What is it?
For us, it actually says it behind us. Creativity just got a lot more colorful. That's a very neat statement, but it actually has meaning.
You mean high dynamic range?
Well, no, for us really, it's been about reimagining the way our users, and that in particular is editors, are working with color. It turns out that everyone is doing it, but there are so many different ways of doing it, and there is not necessarily a logical way of plugging that in with the hub product, which is Premiere in this case, looking at our line of products. So we've reimagined everything. So you now have beautiful new scopes that look gorgeous, are real time, but that's just the technical part of it. On the other side, the creative part, I think, is much more exciting. We now have controls that are very much Lightroom style, the way you operate, so a lot of people will be familiar with it. Just looking at them, you know what to do, which is great. But it's a merge of technology from Lightroom, from SpeedGrade, and actually a lot of things that didn't exist before. So it's a great tool set, but most exciting to me beyond that, always exciting things, one more, you actually don't have to do anything to get started, because there's now a task-oriented workspace called Color. You click on it, and then boom, there you go. Scopes light up, you have the program monitor, your sequence in front of you, all the tools, and then you can actually go from clip to clip, and it's an intrinsic effect. So you no longer have to find the color correction tool you'd like, drop it on. Next clip you have to do this again, maybe you need another color corrector. It's been efficient in a way, the way it's been done in the past,
Yes.
but not as intuitive as we have it now with the redesigned workflow, and for sure not as fast. So that's the thing that we're looking
Yes,
at
I agree.
with everything we do. We try to make things faster and more accessible.
Yes, and I think that's probably, if we're talking about Premiere, I'll get back to high dynamic range in a sec, but one thing that was the impressive thing to me about CC, the Premiere CC and the new colour, the way you look at colour and how you offer colour capabilities to the end user, right, very much opens something which is a bit of a black art to that user. Because the issue with today's editor is that they're asked to do everything.
Yeah.
And that's just been difficult, because if you're serious about colour, you want to go to a proper colour system like SpeedGrade, but the budgets are too low, etc.
And there's a threshold. I mean, if you already know one application really well, doing something that fits with the paradigm of that application, we feel is very important.
That's
which
right.
is why we made the investment. So it's not just SpeedGrade moved into Premiere.
No,
it's
not.
really completely reimagined.
That's right. And one thing I like to say as well, editors generally don't make good graders, right?
I'm
But
not so sure
generally,
about that.
not all the time, but usually you find an editor and a grader. But the thing is, the editor is having to become a grader. It's like a film person is doing a lot more video as well, because it's part of their job description now.
Yes.
And this is what's happening in the production industry as well. And Adobe has responded and made those tools. And that's why it's impressive, because
Thank you.
that's what the industry needed. So that was a good move from you on that part. But let's move on to, if you can talk about high dynamic range. It's quite a big, at the Cinema Summit, it was talked about a lot. 2020, if you go to the Sony booth, they're showing 2020 monitors and high dynamic range, high nits, etc. All the television manufacturers want to move to it as fast as possible so they can get you to buy a new television. There's different market forces going on here that don't always make sense. And that's what I want to put across here. High dynamic range and the market forces, to me, aren't really making sense right now. And that's why I ask you about it, because can you help to make sense from all this push and pull from the different markets? What do you see happening with high dynamic range?
It's certainly happening in general. You can see many manufacturers now. You already mentioned monitors are there now to eventually be capable of
That's right.
using high dynamic range. So that's quite exciting all by itself. It's not just more pixels. It's not just wider screen size, more real estate. It's also indeed, more immersive color. We talk about more immersive audio. I think high dynamic range has the potential to make everything more immersive. So you can be in the moment. So that's great about the technology all by itself. In terms of the various approaches to it, you will definitely be able to see Premiere used with one of those. So at the Dolby booth, if you look at the Dolby Vision demo, or one of the demo pods they've got, there's actually a technology demo of Premiere driving one of them. So we've been working very closely with them, and obviously we're talking with other manufacturers as well. As we take color very seriously, it's a very logical path for us moving forward.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly right.
To see where we're going with high dynamic range,
That's
what
right.
eventually will emerge as a standard, what will be successful in the market. That's not for us to decide. We just want to make sure that we're involved early on, so we understand the tech,
yes.
and then can eventually actually also do something that's, again, easy enough for the user to apply to.
Absolutely.
If you were to do it today, it is a very geeky thing.
Absolutely.
I gotta tell you, you've seen the demos.
I
it's
understand.
hard to grasp what's going on.
That's right. It's very
We've
geeky.
got to make an attempt to make it easier.
That's right. It's a little bit of black magic going on there, and one of the objects I've been doing with, especially at the Cinema Summit, and talking to all the people who are at the committee meetings, especially projector manufacturers who know what the projectors are capable of, and really, see, the thing about high dynamic range to me, 2020 is a little bit strange. In the past with 709 and 601, those colour spaces were based on monitors we had.
True.
They were on the desk. That's what they did. They standardised that. 2020 is about a dream, a colour space that we want to get to. For example, the Sony OLED monitor I just went to see, it does 2020 at 80%. Of 2020,
which is pretty good.
That's pretty good. But it's not actually, if Canon brings out a monitor and it's 85%, then are the monitors the same? Are we grading against the same?
But we've been dealing with that problem for some time now, right? And honestly, I don't think that's a bad thing. If you look back, people thought we're working against a standard that's well communicated, well propagated, and it's always true that things would look the same if produced to that standard. You got to have that dream, but it was a dream with 709 as well. We didn't have everything capable of doing 709 when it was switched over from 601, right? So I think that's part of the process, very natural, and I'm not concerned about that as well. We just got to become clever as to how to work with something that is not 100% according to the standard. I think it's very meaningful to get there step by step, incrementally, but then ultimately what we're thinking about, what we're looking into is a way to manage all that without, again, bringing that back onto the user. We've talked about the 200 outputs. Imagine if we were to say, now do something kind of, I'm exaggerating, but do something for each monitor. That would become quite impossible.
That's exactly right. This is why these issues are so
important.
important.
The conversation, finding what's the essence of it, and trying to come up with something that is applicable for at least the vast majority of the devices will eventually make it easier for us to produce content that is better looking, more immersive, and will actually move the industry forward in general.
Well, anyway, to finish off, is there anything else you want to share before we go?
I always want to mention one thing because I personally believe it's the most fun thing we've done in years.
Yes.
There's a new product called Character Animator, which we show as a preview.
Yes.
And it's amazing what you can do breathing life into Photoshop or Illustrator work, just using those products, which so many know how to use, but it's quite hard to get from that step to animating a character and creating a video, bringing life to it, making it talk. And Character Animator just does that. So you're taking a Photoshop or Illustrator file with its layers, and we do the rigging for it pretty much behind the scenes for you. You can do everything manually.
You've basically standardized the rigging. So.
Well, you can change everything you like, but typically, a mouth is a mouth. So
yeah, that's right.
You might make it connect to the nose, but I think probably typically you would want to.
That's right.
So, but the great thing is then you point a camera and a microphone towards yourself, and then that character will actually not only follow your movements, but it will also speak when you speak. It will blink with an eye when you blink with the eye, and so forth. So you can actually pretty much connect yourself with the animation process, and that's quite exciting and an enormous amount of fun.
Yes, it is fun to do. Anyway, thank you very much, Patrick.
Thanks
it's always
a
good conversation with you at NAB. So this is NAB 2015. This is Adobe, and thank you very much from Adobe, and bye for now.